On behalf of the Santa Barbara Museum of Art, I want to welcome you this evening. And my name is Patsy Hicks, Director of Education here at the museum. And I'm asking you first, before we get warm and fuzzy, to please turn off the noise of your cell phones before we start. So if you haven't turned that off, if you could do that. And I just want to say what a joy it is to see so many of you here, and what a pleasure it has been every time, but especially this time, to see the kinds of connections that Susan makes, whether it's through her books, or through conversations on the beach, or through longtime friendships in Santa Barbara, or from just meeting someone 5 minutes ago when she was waiting outside the auditorium. There's a kind of a magic there, and I'm so glad we can all be a part of it, and that she's willing to come here not just once, not just twice, but again and again, and we are looking forward to the next time already. So it's like when you see your children and you don't want to say goodbye, and you're already planning next Christmas, even when this Christmas hasn't come. So that's the way I feel about Susan. So we are so delighted and fortunate to have back with us this evening award-winning author Susan Straight. Her new novel, Mecca, and I'm wondering how many of you have already read it. It's fabulous. If you haven't read it yet, you will. Was published in March 2022 by Farrar, Straus, and Giroux, receiving stellar reviews by The Economist, The Wall Street Journal, The New York Times, The Los Angeles Times, The Washington Post, and others. Those newspapers agree on hardly anything these days. It's nice to know they had the wisdom to see this. Her 2019 memoir, In the Country of Women, which she shared with us on this stage, was a national bestseller, named a Best Book of the Year by NPR and Code Switch, and longlisted for the Carnegie Medal for Excellence. She has published 8 previous novels, including High Wire Moon, a finalist for the National Book Award and bestseller, and A Million Nightingales, a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize. And tonight, after this, she will be signing her books outside, and I want to thank Michael and Chaucer's Bookstore for being here, and they have a representation of others of her books, but especially Mecca, for her to sign and for you to enjoy. Her stories and essays have appeared in O. Henry Prize Stories, Best American Short Stories, Best American Essays, The New York Times, The New Yorker, Granta, Harper's, and elsewhere. Her awards include the Lannan Prize for Fiction, the Edgar Award for Best Mystery, and a Guggenheim Fellowship. Her work has been translated into French, Spanish, German, Turkish, Arabic, Swedish, Polish, and Japanese. Susan was born in Riverside, California, where she still lives, just 3 blocks away, I think, from where she first started. She serves as Distinguished Professor of Creative Writing at the University of California, Riverside. And it is our great joy and pride that one of her daughters, Delphine Sims, was a curatorial assistant here, and now she's about to break through into the great world, and we feel lucky to have been a part of that, too. It is that essential energy of Riverside, the realness and authenticity, that reverberates in her conversation and her writing. Like Joan Didion before her, Straight's sense of place, of the West, its cadence and rhythm, its play between identity and language, permeates her work. How do we reevaluate how we see the land, our history, ourselves? The stories she tells with courage and grace transform us, even as they push us into deep, familiar, and sometimes difficult territory. Please join me in welcoming, in our warmest possible way, Susan Straight.
I don't have anything to show you. The last time I was here, it was really important, and I was so appreciative of having the ability to show images because I was talking about In the Country of Women, which a really important part of that was these historical photographs of my marriage family, as well as my mom and my dad, and like all these 6 generations of women who had migrated from all these different places to the West. And so it was really fun seeing them. But this time I'm just going to read to you. And actually, I want to thank everyone here at SBMA. Being in Santa Barbara is always a dream. And when Patsy invites me, what really means a lot to me is that I get to walk around Santa Barbara and just think, because I have 3 grown kids, I've got sons-in-law, I've got a family of about 400. My mom is 87, and she has a 30-second memory right now because she has dementia. And so my ex-husband just had COVID in last November. So I have to take care of so many people, and that is a part of my life. But to be up here means I'm completely free, and so it's not just that I'm totally excited that I get to come here, but Patsy treats me like a writer in residence, and I got to go speak to Professor Joshua Escobar's group at Santa Barbara City College, and that meant a lot to me too, because I went to John W. North High School, and then I went to Riverside City College, and then I went to USC, and so the whole California experience to me is always embodied when I come up here. And just today, getting to walk, finally I calmed down and I was like, okay, let me work on this next project. This is Mecca. It's going to be fun to talk to you about it, and it's the first of a trilogy. And so I finished the second book last month, and I started the third one today, thanks to you guys. And you're going to laugh, but of course I started it in a legal pad because I did. And I sat outside at McCormick House and wrote about 20 pages in the legal pad. And that's the only way my brain works still, because I had the little Smith Corona, typewriter. And so I got used to writing by hand and then typing in the typewriter. Sorry, I had 900 trick-or-treaters on Halloween, and I got RSV. Is that the fancy way for saying what the kids gave me when they hugged me after, because I'm the vieja on the corner who always has good candy. I've been in my house for 34 years, and we're quite famous for Halloween. So I had 900 trick-or-treaters. I gave away 300 books and 600 pieces of candy. I know, I have the fence library in front of my house. What I want to say to you about Mecca, and I'd like to read a little part of it as well, is that a lot of times when people say, well, why do you keep writing about that place? I actually have to say my stepdad from Canada, died in May of 2021. And one of the things he wanted Delphine, who used to work here, he wanted Delphine and I to have his Sue Grafton books. And it was this huge deal, like that he had this whole collection. He had every single one. And I also have not gotten Delphine yet to read Ross MacDonald. But like the visions of Southern California that mystery writers have given us, right? There's so many people make fun of mystery as a genre, or they make fun of what they call commercial women's fiction. You guys know what I'm talking about, where people are like, but that's not literary fiction. I think all those distinctions are ridiculous, because I grew up in a family that had Reader's Digest condensed books, as I was telling Professor Escobar's class. We didn't have a library in my house. Neither of my parents got to graduate from high school. My mom went back to school when I was 15. She went to Riverside City College. And I saw her textbooks. And I thought, well, this is serious stuff. But what we had is, and maybe some of you remember this, we had the Encyclopedia Britannica, right? How many of you, that's what you had, right? So, I mean, I just read it over and over again. So my kids are like, Mom knows the most obscure crap. Like, maraschino cherries come from Dalmatia. And they're like, okay. Just like, that is where they came from. And they're like, what about Dalmatians? I'm like, that too, but that's easy. You knew that one, but you didn't know about the maraschino cherries. We were so poor. Remember, like, maraschino cherries would be the only thing in the refrigerator? Do you remember that? And it used to be like, it's the middle of the night, and there's no food in the house, and it's 5 kids. My brothers and sisters and I would be like, the only thing in there is those red cherries. And we were like, but we could drink the stuff. Maybe it tastes good. Anyway, that's what I remember. I remember sharing, like one box of Cracker Jacks, and like I had to parcel it out for 5 kids. And like each person had to get the right number of peanuts, and that never worked. So yes, we had Encyclopedia Britannica. And the other thing we had were Reader's Digest condensed books. Does anybody in here remember those? Well, so for someone like my mom, that was a middle-class aspiration, wasn't it? And those books had gold on the pages. Do you remember that? And so my mom thought these were the most important kinds of books that you could have to be an American. And I'm telling you this story, which I haven't really told in this depth ever before, because I thought about it, Joshua, when we were talking yesterday. For someone that grew up like me in a whole military neighborhood where the moms were from the Philippines, Japan, moms were from Germany, moms were from England, my mom was from Switzerland. They all had married military guys. They wanted to be American in the worst way. And all of us, their kids, were kind of the first generation to be in this kind of lower income, tract housing where everybody was in the military. And so I thought about what it meant that the people who sold those books came around and sold them in my neighborhood, right? If you read Reader's Digest condensed books, you got a woman's fiction kind of thing. You got a thriller. You got some kind of historical book, and then you got like a commercial thing like Hotel by Arthur Haley or something like that. I always thought that those books were just as valuable, all of those kinds of books, because I learned just as much from the thrillers. And don't you think? So I say all that as prelude because I started writing about Johnny Frias in 2009. I was asked to write for an anthology called Orange County Noir. And when you look at the word noir and you think about what noir means, it's a very specific kind of mystery or thriller, isn't it? And it's more about like your emotions and your attitude. And so I have a friend named Louis Lozano. He actually called me. He called this morning. We're the same age. We both just turned 62. And Louis is from Corona, and he had a really violent streak when he was growing up. He's got a black widow tattooed right here and a crown because Corona was the crown city. And when I first met Louis 30 years ago, he had one inherent sadness in him that he told me about almost the first 2 years I knew him. And his young daughter, when she was 5, was accidentally killed by his best friend and neighbor across the street. In the driveway, his neighbor accidentally ran over Louis' 5-year-old daughter. And Louis was, I think he was 24 years old at that time. And everything that has happened in his life since then has come from that moment. And he still talks to me about that moment at least 2 or 3 times a year, sitting on the porch. And he married someone, he has 3 stepsons, but nothing changes that inherent sadness. And that's to me what the word noir means. And Louis tried to escape his sadness by going in the military, by being in the Marines, by boxing, by almost killing people. And none of that happened until he got peace. And in the story of Louis was the fact that he is Moreno, he is a dark-skinned man born in Corona to a mom from Corona and a dad from Jalisco. And he was told, you could never be a cop, not looking like that, not coming from where you come from. So if you're like, wait, what are you telling us? I'm telling you that I am lucky enough to be a good listener. And that the preface to all this is that when people say, well, how do you write about this or why do you write about it? Because when someone cries on my front porch as a grown man and tells me these things, I just keep thinking about it. And so in 2009, I wrote about this guy, Johnny Frias, who people are saying, as he's a California Highway Patrolman and a motorcycle officer, people are saying to him, well, what makes you able to be a cop? Like, do you even speak English? Johnny Frias would fit perfectly in Santa Barbara because his mom came with the Anza party. And they crossed the Santa Ana River about a mile from my house. I walk there all the time with the dog just to be there. They crossed in 1774. And the Anza family, settled, like you have the Lugos here. I know there are Lugos in Southern California too. The idea of what a rancho was, and then how many of my friends also, like maybe their dad, people came from Jalisco in 1880. My mom just got here in 1952. So when I was at North High, I looked like this, but I was the first generation one. And all of my Chicano friends are like, yeah, my people have been here since like 1774. Wait, your mom just got here, right? Is she even a citizen? And I'd be like, no. So I love saying to my classes, my mom wasn't even a citizen until I was 3, and she became a citizen solely so she could so that she could vote for JFK. She would have married JFK if she could have. So I'm going to read you a little bit about Johnny Frias. He's a California Highway Patrolman, and that's also part of what I wanted to talk about, is that this is a book set during COVID, when nurses who are friends of mine, guys who are first responders, and people who are installing air conditioning or working in a cafeteria were on the front lines. So I'm going to read you a little about the wind. We were supposed to get the wind on Tuesday, and it didn't come, did it? But at home, my neighbor Mario and his wife called me, and they were like, everything blew out of your yard. And I was like, okay. All the trucks blew over in the Inland Empire on Tuesday night. The wind started up at 3 a.m., the same way it had for hundreds of years. The same way I used to hear the blowing so hard around our little house in the canyon that the loose windowsills sounded like harmonicas. The old metal weather stripping played like the gods pressed their mouths around the screens in the living room where I used to sleep when I was growing up. After I got off work this morning, the wind took a break, and I was knocked out for a few hours, waking up to hear Rose Sotelo's radio next door playing ranchera music, tubas and trumpets thumping up against the stucco, her canaries worried in their little songs. But now that I was back on shift, the patrol Harley was pushing hard against the big gusts, and the Santa Anas were blowing crazier than ever, the way they did in the afternoons, like they woke up fierce from the nap. Brazilian pepper trees, the ones that grew in every vacant lot or frontage road area along the 91 and the 55 freeways, had those long branches like ferns or seaweed. And when the wind blew them sideways like skirts, I could see homeless encampments under a lot of the trees. It was a Thursday in October. Santa Ana winds, 94 degrees, fire weather. People were 3 layers of pissed off. Everyone hated Thursday. Wednesday was hump day, but Thursday was when people drove like they wanted to kill each other. Today, everyone was thinking of Halloween. The women wondering what sexy costume to wear for parties now that grown-ups had taken over the holidays. The men pissed, this is 2019, you're gonna laugh. The men pissed that the Dodgers had lost, even though they were supposed to be the boys of October, and now the 2019 baseball season was over. The kids are already tired of school and practice. And then the wind. Every few minutes, dust and trash flew across the lanes. But fall winds always made me think of my mother, holding me tight in the old redwood chair my father had tied to the porch railing up in Fuego Canyon, while the Santa Anas blew in the black night when they always started. My first memory, her talking to me before dawn, gusts so strong it felt like our house would go rolling down the canyon like a tumbleweed, the horses snorting in the barn, and my father down in the orange groves, making sure the trees didn't dry out. Nothing else is for sure but the wind, my mom would say, while the eucalyptus leaves and bark flew past us. We might not get rain, mijo, not for a whole year, but we always get the Santanas. My mother loved the wind, but she knew that the flames would follow. And it wasn't just that she was watching for fire. She would hold me tight and say, we're going to look out for smoke, but right now, it's like we're in the ocean. Look at this, Johnny, look. So I wanted to read you that little part to show you that particular character and to say to you, I don't know where that comes from. I mean, if you're a surgeon, you know what your hands are doing and your brain is attached. If you're a sociologist, I think you're very good at reading people. And for me as a fiction writer, all those stories that people have told me for my whole life, they all kind of come to play, but it's always mixed with the landscape. And I think that's what makes me a particular kind of writer, is that all of you know this wind, right? You know how it is in Santa Barbara. And for me, when I was a little kid, I always thought that where I lived was magical. And then when I got older, I found out that everyone thought Riverside, San Bernardino was just the pits. The armpit of the world, they would say. They're like, oh, you live out there in the IE? What do you even have out there? And I'm like, methamphetamine, oranges. They're like, don't you guys have cows out there? I'm like, yes. Also smog. But what we also had was this fierce kind of attachment to the landscape, which I find stunning. Delphine loved it up here. Then she moved. My middle kid is 31, and she worked here for 4 years, I think it was. She loved it up here. Then she went to live in Berkeley. Then she went to live in New York last year. Now she lives in Washington, D.C. All she does is want to come home. Now she's looking at houses in Riverside. As my sister-in-law used to say, you could have knocked me over with a feather, right? The thing about Johnny Frias is that I wanted to write a character who is California, you know? And because he looks a certain way, people think, oh, he's not, but he is. And his mom is a seminal figure in his life. And he grows up on a cattle ranch in the Chino Hills. So I was trying to write about, if you know where the 91 freeway is, and it follows the Santa Ana River, there are canyons everywhere, just like there are here. And if you live up here, you know all those canyons, don't you? And you'll be like, oh, there's that canyon. Well, I feel like that is something people don't get about California. So if I'm in New York, I've traveled everywhere for this book. I've been to the South, I've been to, Seattle and New York and Chicago and everywhere else. And I love that people think California is flat. They're just like, it's just all flat. And then there's Hollywood, there's the sign. And I'm like, you realize the sign, like the reason you can see this, it's in the mountains, right? And they're like, oh, I guess you're right. It's like, yes, that's the Hollywood sign. They're like, and then there's the ocean. I'm like, yeah, don't go to the ocean very often when you live in Riverside. But it's not flat, is it? There's every little hill. And I love how from my house, I can see 4 mountain ranges. I can see 4 different mountain ranges. So I wanted to write about the canyons. I wanted to write about the weather. And then I wanted to tell you about 3 more of the characters. One of my favorite characters is Grief Embers. That's a strange name. I mean grief like grief. So because I grew up in Riverside, San Bernardino, Colton is in between us. And there's this beautiful road called the Agua Mansa Road. And Agua Mansa was a community of New Mexicans, much like who settled the Presidio area here, right? Many of those people were soldiers who came from northern New Mexico. Well, I grew up with a family called the Trujillos. We all went to school together. And the Trujillo family, their ancestors settled in Agua Mansa and La Placita de los Trujillos in 1842. So when I hang out with Darlene, Sharon, and Nancy, who are a little bit older than me, and we all went to North High together, we often talk about what it meant that their ancestors settled that particular place. So I was trying to write about the beauty of this landscape, and part of our history is that Biddy Mason and Hannah Embers were 2 black women who were enslaved, who were brought with Mormon wagon train to San Bernardino. So everyone maybe doesn't remember, but San Bernardino was once the largest city in Southern California. LA had like 1,000 people, but San Bernardino had 3,000 people and was super rich because they had all the timber. Not like that now. But I wanted to write about the descendant of Biddy Mason and 2 of the women that came with her. And one young woman was named Hannah Embers. And so Grief Embers, this other character I was going to read you a little part of, he's an animal control officer. And that also allowed me to write about coyotes and burros and mountain lions and all of the things. Because during COVID, as you all know, what happened? Everyone, the animals were like, oh my God, it's so nice that you guys are not out anymore. So, people would talk up here, even coyotes walking right down the middle of the street, right? Raccoons taking things over. It was definitely that way in Riverside and San Bernardino. And I got kind of obsessed with it, not just because of me seeing it, but because I have friends who are animal control officers, and they would be like, yeah, this bobcat straight up went into an Amazon warehouse, and everybody lost their mind. The bobcat just went over to a pile of boxes and laid down. And there was a big story 2 weeks ago where there was a mother bear and 2 cubs in the Los Angeles Arboretum, and it took 2 days for them to tranquilize the cubs. So I wanted to read you a little part about that. And that would let me also talk to you a little bit about COVID. Sorry, I didn't remember what page this was on. So I wrote this particular story called The Perseids. I wrote this chapter. And this chapter was published in a magazine called Granta. And one day I got a call from my agent, and she said, Jennifer Beals wants to have lunch with you. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? Jennifer Beals, yes. Of course, my ex-husband and every other man in my life was like, Flashdance, Flashdance? And I was like, yes, Flashdance. And they're like, you don't sound as excited as we are. And I'm like, I'm excited. So she read this story in Paris after buying it in Granta at a Paris bookshop. And this story became a huge focal point for this novel as well, because Johnny Frias and Grief Embers were friends. When they were 19, they both played baseball against each other. And there's 4 men that end up going to the California Highway Patrol Academy. And it's not easy to get into that kind of law enforcement. And he's the only one that makes it. So Grief ends up becoming an animal control officer, and he marries his high school sweetheart, Lorette, and she's an ICU nurse during COVID at St. Bernardine Hospital. So as I was working on this story, it was before COVID. And I knew Dante, their son, was by himself. And it was nighttime. And it was really, really dark. And it was dark because someone had stolen all the copper wire from the streetlights, which happened a lot in my neighborhood during this time too. But I didn't realize where his mom was until I finished it. And then I thought, well, of course. She's working at the hospital during COVID, and like so many of my friends, she literally couldn't come home. I had friends that stayed in RVs so that they wouldn't bring COVID home to their family. Or they had elaborate systems set up in their garage where they would go into the garage, take all their clothes off, shower in the garage, move the washer and dryer out to the garage, all before they could even go inside and see their families. So all of this started coming together during COVID. So I'm going to read you a little bit about Dante. Dante's dad is Grief, the animal control officer. There is a cuss word here, so I apologize. I mean, he's a teenage boy. April 22nd. So that was October 2019, what I read you. Are you bored? Okay, I can't see you now. This is April 22nd, 2020. Dante was supposed to keep a quarantine journal for school. Manny and Montreal, so Dante is 13. He's in junior high. Manny and Montreal had texted them, F that, a diary is for girls. Dante laughed, but he still tried to write in the extra notebook his mother had brought from Rite Aid when school stopped back in March. He was alone for at least 4 hours a day now, mostly at night, since his mother had to stay in an RV somebody had donated for the nurses to live near St. Bernardine Hospital because she couldn't come home or she'd bring the virus to him and his father. He imagined it coating her, the people coughing and the respirators that she said pushed clouds of droplets into the air by the beds. The emergency room full of mist carrying the virus they always showed on TV like stupid blue and red rubber toys floating around. There were 5 trailers now parked on the dead-end street. His mom's trailer had a Dodgers flag in the window. He and his father left a bag with clean clothes for her at the curb. Nobody touched his mom's old Honda Accord. She called it the plague wagon. Dante could only ride in his father's truck, the '59 Apache that Manny Delgado's dad had started restoring last year. Mr. Delgado put in a new engine, but the truck was still painted with black primer. Because his dad was never home. The animals had started taking over the earth all around San Bernardino, Rialto, and Fontana. Dante's dad worked extra shifts too, trying to catch raccoons that had colonized empty stores, possums that had 12 babies inside someone's locked-up beauty salon. A huge male bobcat came up from the Santa Ana River and walked right down Riverside Avenue in Colton into a warehouse where the workers freaked out and called animal control. His dad had shot the bobcat with a tranquilizer gun, where it was hiding in a big pile of empty boxes. He took the bobcat up to Lytle Creek and left it there in a canyon, waiting in the county truck until he could see the cat wake up and walk off into the brush. His father told him it was like a drunk dude trying to maintain his dignity. You know, kind of slantwise, but still proud. He showed Dante a picture of the bobcat on his phone, and it was the most beautiful animal that Dante had ever seen. Long legs and faint spots and soft triangle ears standing straight up, a tuft of black hair at the top. Dante's mom came home that night after she showered and disinfected at the RV. She only came home on Sundays. She said to his father, Grief, you caught that? Look at those ears. It's like he put mascara on the edge of the fur just to make himself even prettier. His mother cooked a huge pot of rice and beans and made a whole roasted chicken in the oven. She sat at the table and ate with them. She looked a little bit like her old self. She looked at his father and said, I can see that bobcat walking straight down Route 66, right? And his father looked surprised. She'd been crying for an hour before dinner in their bedroom. He said, right past the Wigwam Motel. one of the first songs she'd ever taught Dante, something she used to make his father sing all the time when Dante was little. Get your kicks on Route 66. So that's like a second. So I tried to braid all these narratives together and give sort of this large sense of what it's like to live. And I wanted to tell you something I haven't thought of saying, because I don't usually read that part. I saw a bobcat. Not recently. My dog and I were walking down at the Santa Ana River, which, like I said, I walk down. I'll walk this way, and it'll be where the Anza party crossed. And it's now a homeless encampment, but I can still see where the bridge was built. And I do that because my brother-in-law, I have 4 brothers-in-law, and the biggest one, he's 6'6" and weighs 385. He's a security guard. And everyone's always like, you don't have a gun. And we're like, he just has a taser. But when someone attacks him, like someone attacked him 3 weeks ago, and he was like, yeah, I just had to let him down real soft. But he's a security guard, and he was in charge of watching all of the county equipment along the Santa Ana River where they were building a new pipeline because someone tried to steal the crane. And so they stole the water buffalo truck. So then my brother-in-law was there working at the Anza crossing next to the memorial. Super weird. He said it was haunted. So we either walked there or we walked the other way. And one day we walked the other way, and it must have been around 6 o'clock, just dusk. And I know better, because coyotes always like roll up on me and the dog. But this time we looked up and there was a bobcat. Wow. And it was just sitting. It had just come out of the brush and it was sitting, and it just looked at my dog and my dog looked at it, and they both took like one step back and they were like, and then I was like, oh my God, you're a bobcat. And the bobcat looked at me like, well, yes, I am. And my dog, like, are you talking to the bobcat? And I was like, I don't know what else to do. I'm terrified, but it's very beautiful. And it was tall. You know, it was a very tall animal. And then it just turned and it leapt, like, over the brush. And my dog was like, dang, I wish I could do that. But I'm on a leash. And I'm waiting for my milk bone. So I wanted to read you that part and just to sort of say, like, that's the weirdness of being a writer, is that sometimes something happens years ago and then, are you bored or should I read you one more part? Okay. So there are other characters in here that I love, and there is a character here named Jimena who crosses the border, and then she is working in what's called a medi-spa for people who have gotten plastic surgery, and she's living in Coachella near she's working near the town of Mecca. So this part is about Jimena. She's 19 years old, and she's gotten this job within 3 weeks of crossing the border, and she is living with her mother's cousins in Mecca. Jimena knelt by the bathtub. Luz checked constantly for stray hair. Luz is the boss. Jimena lifted the circular net of blonde hair gathered on the drain. It was like a tiny fishing net, with small holes where the water had drained through the fine strands. She thought about the 3 words, pelo, hair, ihi. She's learning to speak Spanish. She doesn't speak Spanish. She speaks Mixtec. So she's learning 2 languages. Finally, she looked at the woman in the bedroom. As she brought the flowers inside and new pillowcases, the med tech, Anita, shook her head and motioned toward the dresser. She was massaging the woman. She was working on the face above the bandages of the boobs. The television was on. Jimena was dizzy with all the sounds. Anita, a pale woman with an apricot uniform, moving the skin of temples and cheeks and throat, tapping lightly above the eyebrows, her long fingers in perfect unison while her own eyes watched the television. The room loud with the humming of machines. Anita might have been the age of Jimena's abuela, her grandmother. Anita's forehead was shiny and tight, but her throat was ringed by 20 or 30 lines, like delicate necklaces, and her chest was marked by pale sequins from the sun. Jimena's abuela's face was 2 smooth mounds of brown cheek. Her black eyes were squinted to a single gleam. Her throat and chest were unmarked and golden. Her grandmother was so small that she fit under the arm of Jimena's brother Esteban the night before they left. Her grandmother had given birth to 6 children. 2 daughters died as babies of fever. The 3 sons went north to California, Emiliano, Epifanio, and Eufemio. And Josefina, the last child, was Jimena's mother. She had disappeared when Jimena and her brother were 5 and 7. Jimena went back for the vacuum. In the garage, outside Calexico, the coyote had flashed the pen light into their faces. She couldn't believe that she had seen her brother Esteban when they crossed the All-American Canal, sliding away from her, only his hand, the last thing she saw, his hand in the air, and she never saw him again. Those were the things I wanted to read. I have not ever read that one, but I wanted to read that one today because I was thinking, Joshua, about what we were talking about with the class, is that when you're writing something like that, which it makes me sad. My brother died in 2002, and not like that, but I miss him every day. And I ran into someone the other day. Her name is Lupe, and she's a security guard too. She works with my brother-in-law, and she lost her brother just 6 months ago to COVID. He was 38, and he didn't believe in COVID, and he didn't get a vaccine, and he died. And she was crying, and she's tough. Lupe's tough. She was wearing her uniform, and we were talking about our brothers, and she said, it's a strange thing that people want you to get closure, like you're supposed to get closure and move on with your life. And she said, I want to remember him every single day. And we said a memorial mass for him last week, and I still remember my brother every day. And that story comes from a guy I know named Roberto, who crossed the border with his brother. Roberto was 17, and his brother was 19, and they crossed the Rio Grande, and his brother stumbled and drowned and floated away from him. And I've known Roberto. I met him when he was 17. He's 40 now. He's still sad. He's still sad every single day. He misses his brother. He's married. He has a kid. He is a landscaper. He is still sad. The essential sadness in him and my friend Louis are the same. And so I thought about that, like he told me that story 20 years ago too, and the first time I ever wrote about it was now. And somehow when I pictured this young woman crossing the border, I knew that was going to be the defining moment in her life. So if you guys are like, well, this is not a cheerful book, this is a very sad book, I'd say that some of my favorite things were to write about the way CHP guys talk to each other when they're giving out tickets, even though you're like, we do not like those guys. They're also the guys that come up on somebody when they've had an accident and get them out of the car. And so I also loved writing about the way my nurse friends talk about people's bodies and about how tenderly they were able to care for strangers during COVID. And one of the things I said on the radio show today, there's 4 nurses on my block and then 3 nurses on the next block. And so every night they would tell me stories. All those big men who had COVID, and they had to lie on their stomachs, right? And if you're a grown man, most of the time you're not going to lie on your stomach, and the way your feet look and how vulnerable you are when someone can see the soles of your feet. Those were the details that I wanted to write about. So I can't say this book is happy or sad. I think of it as that tragicomic combination that we Californians do so well. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say, but I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions and answers, especially if people want to talk about publishing or they want to talk about just anything. I have no idea how much time is left because I got nothing. But I'm willing to answer any questions except for my youngest daughter already called while I didn't answer the phone. She was like, we need to get you some better clothes and you need to fix your hair better. And also, when you come back, I'm going to buy you some Eileen Fisher and stop wearing your Marshalls. So you're not allowed to ask me anything about my clothes because I already know. And I don't want to hear it. This is what I'm wearing. And everything else is on the table, though.
How do you know? You said that this is a trilogy, and you probably, when you wrote Mecca, you already knew there were 2 more books coming. How do you know that, or do you?
I think what happened is that I thought about Johnny Frias for so long, and that there were these 4 guys. There's Johnny Frias and Manny Delgado, and then there's this guy named Bobby Carter. He's a master butcher at Stater Brothers. Now, if you're from SoCal, I can say anybody, Stater Brothers, that's SoCal, right? And so he's a butcher, and then there's Grief Embers. So I had these 4 guys, and they all met playing baseball when they were 18 years old, and then they decided they were going to go to the academy. And then I had these 4 women. Magdalena marries Manny, but Johnny doesn't get married, and so he stayed in my mind. He has this secret. There's this thing he witnessed when he was a rookie, and this thing he did, and he's never told anybody this secret. So I was trying to write about the idea we all have a secret, don't we? We all have one thing that we've never told anyone, and it might even be big, it might be small. But for some reason, I even as I was winding this book down, I knew that I wanted to write about him again. I love writing about the freeways. You know, everybody makes fun of us, don't they? And they're like, oh my God, the freeways. And our youngest daughter lives in Pasadena. And so when her dad and I got ready to move her from Hollywood to Pasadena, you know, he rented a truck and we drove to Hollywood. And so you guys know how it is. So he was like, okay, so we're going to take the 60, then we're going to take the 5, and then we're going to take this, and then we're going to do this in Hollywood. But when we go see her, it's 5 freeways from Riverside to Pasadena. That's just the way it is. And so people make fun of that, and I'm like, just think about what I'm telling you. We moved Delphine, the one that used to work here. She called from Berkeley, California, and said, can you guys come get my stuff because I have to move to New York? And we were like, okay. So he rented another truck, Dodge Ram. He's like, I like the Dodge Ram because people move over when I'm getting ready to change lanes. And I'm like, yes, because your truck is tragic. And he's like, it is. It's tragic. No one respects my truck. So he's like, well, let's go get Delphine's stuff. And I said, okay. So we drove for 6.5 hours. He never even turned on the radio. He just talked the whole time. He's like, remember when we did this? Remember when look, Lemoore. Remember Harvey that used to live in Lemoore? I'm like, yes, I remember. Oh, let's get pistachios. You know, they got tequila pistachios now. Like, this is 6 hours of this. We load up the entire thing. He can load it up like an engineer. We cover it with netting. Get back. I've already made us sandwiches. We got chocolate. We've got tea in the thermos. We've got pistachios. Turn around, drive home. And when people from New York talk smack, I'm like, I'm sorry, do you do that? Because we did that 3 times. And they're like, you drove like 6 hours each way? And I was like, yep, the Dodgers were on the way home. So that was 3 hours right there. So for me, there was something about the idea that I wasn't done writing about the freeways and about COVID. And this book ends in August of 2020. And again, I'm actually trying to tell you this with joy. The worst part of COVID happened when? It was Christmas. It was the holidays. During the holidays, in all over California, but especially in the Inland Empire, there were people in the gift shop in our hospital. There were people in the chapel on gurneys. There were people in the parking lot. And I just remember, again, my nurse friends being like, I don't know how to do this. But they did it with grace and with this amazing sense of humor. So I kind of knew I was going to have to write about that. And the next plot also has 3 young guys who are working for a contractor and getting cash only, and something that happens with them. So yeah, I finished that book, and then I started the 3rd one today. And the 3rd one is Grief Embers. It's more of his story, and it starts with a burro that has an arrow. Someone shot a burro with an arrow in Moreno Valley, and I have a friend who has a ranch. He has longhorn cattle, and he has burros there. And so I was hanging out with him, and he told me about this burro. So it starts with a burro. I wasn't ready to be done with the animals yet either. There's 2 questions here, and I think I had missed somebody here as well. Okay, I'll go with you, and then I'll go on that side. And then I'll look up. Sorry, it's hard to see.
Oh, I was curious about the trilogy. What are the other 2 books called? What's the name of the other?
So the one I just finished is called Black Star Canyon. And Black Star Canyon is a real canyon in Orange County. So Santa Ana's here, and the 91 is here. And you know, there's this huge range. The Santa Ana Mountains are really big. And people don't often think of Orange County as having like a large mountain range. But there are lots of mountain lions and other animals. But the Santa Ana range is tall enough that it'll get snow if it's cold enough. And there's this canyon called Black Star Canyon that's said to be haunted. There was a massacre there in a village, and then there was a coal mine there. And it's not far from where Johnny Frias lives in this first book. And so that's that book. And then the third one, I haven't decided yet. I wanted to call that book Tehachapi. Tehachapi? Yes? Yeah, but people in New York are like, I'm sorry, what? Tehachapi? What is that even? And I'm like, so I might, if Black Star Canyon does well enough, I might just be like, this one's going to be Tehachapi. But I don't know. But Tehachapi is, to me, this really important place. Don't you guys think? It's like the place where things shift, and there's also a prison there. And I mean, I grew up, my ex-husband was a correctional officer, and so were many of our family members. That was one of my first short stories I ever wrote, was my sister-in-law, who was a correctional officer and worked in Chino. And our family has been the law enforcement side, and then the days that we find out, you know, someone we love went to prison. And I think that's a dynamic I've always wanted to write about. And Tehachapi is this place to me that exists as a beautiful place, but it's also a prison, and it's kind of like this in between. So anyway, we'll see if that happens. But I can't tell you yet about the plot of the third one since I started it this morning. It's a little early. Yes. 2 questions. I think there's you and there's a person behind you. Yes.
Okay. You said it wasn't a happy book, but I found that there were a lot of really, for me, uplifting, some sad things. I don't want to give it away to anybody that hasn't read the book. I enjoyed every word.
Thank you.
I thought it was just extremely well written. I like that it was a treatment that I have not read before. I have not read anything about the Inland Empire. It really informed me about a lot of people that I have maybe only read about in the newspapers. I really like that. But my question revolves around, at the end of the book, there are 2 people, 2 protagonists at the end,
Matalas.
and I wasn't done with them.
I'm not either.
So will they show up?
Do you mean Matalas and James?
Yes.
So that I did not read to you from Matalas' section. Matalas is one of the women that was going to be in nursing school, and she's a single mom. I loved writing about her as a single mom because I was a single mom for a long time, and like your days are so your margins are so razor thin when you're a single mom. And Matalas is the first time I wrote like something that's actually felt like a love story, and my agent was like, oh my God, is someone going to be happy and maybe kiss someone? And I was like, whatever. And she's like, when does Johnny Frias get to get a girlfriend? And I was like, in the next book. And she's like, so yeah, Matalas and James show up again. James Martinez is a character who's from the Pala Indian Reservation, and I liked him a lot. And so they do show up. This book, I will say, this book had so many characters that some people were like, there were too many people to keep track of. I think it's a function of how I live, because I have this huge community, right? And I liked to meet people, and you know, I met 2 people on the beach last night that are here, and like, will I remember everything about them? Yes. Just my kids call me Mompedia. It's that maraschino cherry thing, man. Like, we just have good memories for whatever reason. But they will be coming back. And behind you?
Ms. Strait, I must say I am in awe of this book. It reads like Cormac McCarthy before he finally went off his nut.
I don't know if that's good or not.
But my big question is, do you get a lot of heat from the appropriation police?
Oh, do I get a lot of people who are saying you shouldn't be writing about this or these kind of characters? I would say that someone who looks as absolutely, Marshall's wearing blonde hair, I look so boring and average that it seems like that would happen. And I think the people are right to bring it up, because I think American Dirt was this huge controversy. At UCR, American Dirt was a giant controversy because I was teaching a fiction class that was 80% Latina, and my students want to write YA fiction and romance fiction with characters that look like them. You know, like that's why Bridgerton was so popular, because my girls loved Bridgerton. They were like, oh my gosh, there are characters that look like us. So I think the reason that my life has gone differently is that I live exactly where I was born, and that I didn't travel somewhere and then pretend to research somebody, that doesn't mean that it doesn't feel weird. Do you know what I mean? I've always written more about men as well. My book, Blacker Than 1,000 Midnights, was about my brother-in-law, a guy like my brother-in-law. The guy I told you about that was a security guard. My brother-in-law was one of the first black firefighters for California Department of Forestry. And he would come home only on 1 day a week, and he would tell these amazing stories about chopping the heads off rattlesnakes with his Pulaski. And like, there were fire shelters. They called them turkey cookers, but they were all one size, and he was 6'6". So he's like, I have to decide if I want to lose my head or my feet. And everyone else would be drunk at the house, and no one would be listening to him except for me. He said, if you don't write about this, then nobody else will, because you're the only one that listens to me. So there is this push-pull where, yeah, sometimes I feel like people have the right to say, I mean, you look like this. What are you doing writing about Johnny Frias and Grief Embers? And then the weird thing is that everyone who's around me in Riverside is like, well, if you don't write about it, no one else would ever pay any attention to us or write about us. So yeah, Joan Didion has been a big shadow. Do you know what I mean? Today I was reading about the auction that was for Joan Didion, right? I feel like Joan Didion was capable of going into some place and like extracting the essence of it, but that then she wasn't of a place, that she left. And I always felt like I was the opposite, that I was born in Riverside, I'll die in Riverside, and I think that is why people tell me stories, is because they know how much I value them. But yeah, I still feel pretty funny about it. It would be better, I always thought when I was younger, if at least I didn't look like this. And my girls just, again, today at 4 o'clock when I was trying to look decent, they reinforce that continually by saying that they're going to fix me. But they know, I think, I'm only good at 2 things. Well, I'm really good at gardening as well. My brother was a master marijuana grower when he was like 12. But I grow like sugarcane and tomatoes and stuff. I'm really good at gardening because my mom's from Switzerland. I'm very good as a mom. Like, I got my books here and I got my kids here. But I'm good with everybody's kids, and I'm good at writing. So I often worry about like this trilogy, like what am I doing? But I also have to say I meet so many people that are like, I'm dying to see Johnny Frias on the screen because I don't have anybody that looks like Johnny Frias on the screen. So Jennifer Beals and her producer are trying to make this into a limited series. And today they were telling me they have two Latino writers who have signed on to do it. And I don't know much about that part because I don't pay much attention because my mom's busy calling me about cat food. But I will be glad if this makes it onto the screen because I too, like Louis wants to see himself on screen. I think that would be something. So it's a good question though. I'm having trouble seeing in the back, but yes, there's somebody. And is there anybody past you? Is there anybody in the back? Okay, good. So I see you, and I see you. Is that good? Sorry to point.
Okay, I was just wondering if first of all, I was very happy to hear that this is the first book in a trilogy, because when it ended, all I could think of was, oh my gosh, what about this character? So I'm wondering if you are going to follow up with Jimena and Bunny and the other characters that were involved in that. I don't want to spoil it.
No, that's okay. There's a terrifying character named Mrs. Bunny, who I also wrote about for 10 years as a short. I wrote some short stories about her before. She's quite scary. I don't think I want to hang out with Mrs. Bunny anymore because she scares me. But I think Jimena might come back. She's not as scary. And one of my favorite characters in the book is Jimena's cousin, Fidelia, who is a true intellectual. So I haven't figured that out just yet. Not yet. But yes, Mrs. Bunny I think is gone because I don't know what else to do with her because she's so scary. She's a woman who is 50 but dresses to look 70 in Hollywood. So that should tell you right now. You're like, wait, what? Yes, that's her jam. Thanks for the question. Hi.
I wanted to ask a little bit more about your writing process and kind of when specifically you realized that it was a trilogy, and if you had to do kind of the messy work, or potentially messy work of parsing out certain material, saying this is for the first one and I'll save some of this, or did you kind of realize the trilogy was a possibility once you finished the draft so you didn't have to separate things out?
That's a really excellent craft question, and I'm I'm happy to talk about it because that's the hard thing is like being a writer is such a strange job because you walk around thinking, like for my students, the one thing I end up telling them is the hardest part about being a writer, and I learned this from James Baldwin. I was lucky enough to study with James Baldwin in graduate school, and I was only 22, I was already married, didn't know anything about anything, was missing home, writing about a place like Riverside in Massachusetts where like I'm walking through 18-foot snowdrifts. And James Baldwin, I remember, he was such a good friend. My then husband, he was 23, he would play basketball with James Baldwin's driver and secretary. They were both tall, young black men. So they would all go to James Baldwin's rental house and play basketball in the driveway, and then James Baldwin and I would sit around and talk about fiction. So how lucky was I? Yeah, Dwayne holds that over my head all the time. He's like, it was because of me. And I'm like, yes, it was because of you. He said, the hardest part of writing is not the actual writing, it's the walking around where someone's like, I thought you were gonna write. And he said, it's like being 9 months pregnant and you're waiting. And he said, I've never been 9 months pregnant, but he said he remembered watching his sister be pregnant. And he remembered looking at her body and thinking about how no one realized how much work it was to be pregnant. He said this to me in like 1984. As a gay man, he said, I looked at her body and I thought, how come no one values the actual work that's going on inside her body while she's just walking around trying to work, right? I think with writing, what I often tell my students is, you know, everyone's like, I thought you were gonna work today, and I don't see you doing this, right? This is the easy part. This is the easy part. Like today, I was thrilled to be able to write. Yesterday, I was like, what am I even doing? Why am I even trying this? And I had to walk. So I went to walk on the beach. I walked like 11,000 steps yesterday. And I hadn't even had my phone with me for days because I just was like not paying attention. But the hardest part is letting yourself think about these characters not as implements for your own use. Do you know what I mean? So today, I'm sitting here thinking about this character named Marisol Montalang. So they're in the new book, Lorette, that's Dante's mom, they're in the RVs outside St. Bernardine's Hospital. There's 5 nurses in these RVs. Well, a lot of California nursing is done by people who are of Filipino descent. A majority of nursing and medical professionals in California right now are people of Filipino and Filipino descent. So I have this character who's like somebody I know too, named Marisol Montalang, and she came to me like this idea that she had. That takes so much time, do you know what I mean? But I don't really watch much TV. I love to read, so I'm always reading. But I don't be on my phone. I have Instagram, but my Instagram is tragic, as everyone says. I post like once a week. And I don't look at it a lot. It's the walking around thinking part that's difficult. In terms of the outlining, this book required more outlining because it's got a plot. You know what I mean? If I were some of the previous books I didn't require outlining, and so I always tell people if plot is a big part, like if you have a mystery plot going on, or you have like a complicated speculative plot, or if it's a fantasy novel where there's going to be like pivotal battles, I don't think it's wrong to outline, do you? Because I think you have to like maybe keep in mind. People are like, no, outlining takes all the spontaneity out of it. I'm like, some students are like, I don't want spontaneity. I would like to be in control of something. I think all of us are different. For me, it's always about, am I done with these characters? And I knew I wasn't done with Johnny Frias because, as she so kindly pointed out, there was 2 characters who had a love interest and Johnny Frias had nobody. And I started thinking like, how come he doesn't have anybody? How come his mom, you know, the legacy of his mom, he's still afraid to be with someone? So that's where the next book started. It's not it's not a good art answer. It's more of like an obsessive kind of answer. So it took a lot of walking around thinking about him too. There was another question in the front here.
Yeah, you may have already started to answer this actually when you said that Louis can't wait to see himself on screen. My question was about how the people that you know who've inspired a lot of these characters, how they reacted to reading your books.
They don't read the books. They just know I'm writing about them. They don't care. They're like, yeah, I don't know, you did a book. My next door neighbor, Mario and Nancy, like are super, they have 5 kids, and that's who's watching my dog. And before them, my neighbor Kim Chanta was living there, and she had 5 kids, and she was on her 4th husband. All of my friends, they're all like, oh my God, you're writing about me, right? And then I say, here's the book, and they're like, cool. And then they put it away, literally never look at it. And I'm like, you saw I thanked you in the book, right? And they're like, oh, yeah, I saw that part. It's like they don't even look up their name in the book. No one cares. But they do like watching TV, so yeah, like everyone's excited, as they should be, for representation, you know? I mean, Johnny is a Moreno character, and Louis is constantly saying that he was the darkest skinned person in his family, and his dad never let him forget that, and that it meant a lot. And of my 3 girls, I have 3 daughters, and Rosette, my youngest one, the one that was trying to fix me up tonight, you know, everyone would say, oh, you're the dark one. Oh, you're the dark one. Like literally people would say that to her all the time. And it makes a huge difference. Sometimes people were like, the 3 of you guys look exactly alike. And, you know, I can't tell you apart. But she's 4, the other 2 are 2 years apart, and then she came 3 years later. And she literally would say to me when she was younger, if one more person says, oh, you the dark one, oh, you the dark one, you look just like this, you know, you just look like your uncle. That meant a lot. So I think to even talk about a character like Johnny Frias and then his friend Manny Delgado is not as dark, you know, he's more of a güero. Just all of that I think matters. And I know for my girls that's what we talk about when we look at television. That doesn't mean we didn't love the Gilmore Girls. We watched the Gilmore Girls obsessively. And then they got to a certain point, and they're like, there's never anyone that looks like us on Gilmore Girls. I'm like, it's Connecticut. And they're like, oh. But they're like, if it's in California. And so there's that part of it as well. But yes, no one ever asked me anything except for, so can I meet Jennifer Beals? Is she going to come to the house? That's the only part anyone cares about. One more question. Any others? No? I can't tell what time it is.
Conversation.
That was fun.
I said it before, but it's just so real that you feel as though you've been with these people and you know them, and you are the same way. I think we all feel tonight like, could she come over now?
No, really, everyone wants my friends to come over. They want Dwayne to come over and tell them stories. That's the thing. Everyone's like, can we meet your ex-husband? He's a really good storyteller. I'm like, I know. Everyone always wants to meet Dwayne. He loved coming up here.
Get books and have Susan sign them. I know I'm hoping that you'll hold that book in your hand again and sign one for my son. And thank you all for being here. Thank you for caring about language, for caring about stories, and for caring about each other.
Yeah, thanks for coming out on a cold Thursday night. It was really nice to see you all. Appreciate it.